This is a dumb question almost. Obviously, because you wrote the book, did you decide on the sequential organization of the chapters? Because I really liked the way this flowed. Because I've read a lot of how-to books myself, and also tech books for computers. One of the things that I've found that's a frustration with some of them that I've read is that the chronological order they go in doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I use the index and jump around the book a lot more than I did when I was reading this, for example. You jumped right from this master page template chapter to chapter 7, time-saving libraries, which just makes a whole lot of sense to me because we were discussing this, now we're jumping over to there. Was that something that, as you were creating the book, you kind of logically did yourself, or is that something that came about through discussions with an editor or people who read the book along the way, or how did that come about?
Good question, because it's actually a combination of all those things. My original pitch outline, basically the order of them was originally laid out by myself, showed them also to Jim Mitchell, who's a good friend, and who's a very smart guy as well, and he gave me his feedback. And then along the way, I know that John Morgan, my editor for the book, also had feedback. So I'm glad that it easily transitions from one chapter to another, and I think all of us had a hand in that. So a combination, I guess. So I guess intuitive is probably the word that I'm looking for, is an intuitive progression from one subject to the next.
But just even general talking workflow of the book, one of the things I liked we're seeing in the time-saving libraries as well as the other chapters, you go into the how you do something, then you're going into, this is what you do, this is the how, but you also go into that why. Like, this is why. This will help you as a time-saving thing. This is a nice little tool. You save it, it's done, you put it in the background. If you need to pull it out later, hey, you got it right there. So it was a really good, just instructional, it was a guide, but it was more than just a do this, and this. It kind of gave you the whatnot behind the processing.
The whatnot. Yeah, that's one of the big benefits of working digital. And if you're not utilizing that, such as once you've done, such an example of this would be a master page template or creating a path like Superman's S. If you're, doing a series of pages with Superman, instead of drawing his S every single time you draw him, why not take an extra 5 or 10 minutes to path out in Photoshop, create a stencil, so to speak, of his S symbol, and then every time from then on out, every time that it's required that you show the Superman symbol, you can just go to that path as your source and distort it, make it look like it's on his chest, and then it'll save you time in the long run, and it'll also improve the integrity of the artwork because it'll be more consistent S. It won't look malformed or anything. So I wanted to highlight those sort of time-saving devices, especially if people think it might take them or nervous about the ramp-up time or the learning curve on getting into this. They will be spending some extra time learning it, but once they've learned it, they'll end up saving time in the long run.
In the years that I've been teaching, I started working a lot more digitally in the sense that a lot of the things I used to do on paper, my lesson plan books, things like that, all of that is now on the computer. Websites that I use with the kids, papers that I used to use with the kids, I've scanned them all in. They're all digital on my computer. One of the things I found as I was doing that, though, was clutter builds up very fast. Chapter 7 is great because you go through just ways to lay out different master reference folders, ways to work with programs as far as saving things, and just a certain organization as to how to do that, which even if somebody reading Chapter 7 doesn't use your exact ways of organizing things, it gives them a framework to work off of to say, hey, these are some of the things that I've found that were really helpful to be able to find things really quick when I need them. But one of the great things about being digital in that sense, you've got everything with you in one spot. Because I used to leave manuals at work that I needed at home. But now with everything being digital and I'm having them all in one place, I've got everything with me whenever I need it. You talk about reference right in the kickoff of that chapter, and that's got to be great as an artist to have your reference with you wherever you're at, because you talked about working off your laptop sometime as well as working off of your desktop, and being able to have access to those things, whether you're at your desktop or your laptop or wherever, it's got to be very helpful as well.
Oh, yeah, it is. And also, specifically with reference, I used to have a huge collection of reference in an analog way, meaning that I had lots and lots of 3-ring binders that had magazine clippings, drawings that I had done that my friends had done or whatever, Xeroxes from anatomy books. I just would try to organize it in all these different 3-ring binders, and what I found is that it became so cumbersome that I wouldn't use it. So as extensive, I made it so extensive that I couldn't use it anymore. So with scanning in and organizing your entire reference collection digitally, it is much more accessible, much quicker to look through. Adobe Photoshop CS2, I think it's CS and above, so CS 2, 3, and 4, all have a program that come with it called Bridge, Adobe Bridge. I do not talk about this in the how-to book, but I think it's common knowledge once you get into Photoshop that there's a program called Bridge. Usually there's even a button you can click on in Photoshop that'll take you to Bridge, so it's a connected program. And you can customize how you see your reference, and you can see a whole bunch of different JPEGs on the screen at the same time. You can adjust the size of them and stuff. So when you're looking through it, you're not flipping one page to the next, to use an analogy of a three-ring binder. Instead, you're seeing a whole screen filled with as many JPEGs as you want to make room for, and it's very time-saving. And in addition to that, in that chapter, in Chapter 7, talking about time-saving libraries, I also discuss creating actions and droplets, although I just briefly go into them. They're a way to automate certain procedures, such as if you're going to save out a series of images at 950 pixels tall or something, ready to email them to your editor. Instead of doing that manually each time, you can set up an action to do it. So I discuss how to do that. I briefly talk about it. And also, if you have created customized textures or customized brushes that give different, instead of, here's an example of a real time saver. If somebody has scaly skin, instead of drawing each of those scales individually, you can, what I did in the how-to book, which is I took a digital photo of some gravel, or rather a piece of sidewalk that had started to bust up, and so it was creating what looked similar to a pattern of scales. I go through the step-by-step procedure showing how to go from that photograph to a customized brush that you can then basically paint with a series of scales so that it looks like you're applying a texture without having to draw them individually, and how you can then save and back up those customized brushes so that you won't lose them, or you can share them with yourself on another computer or a friend or something. So the time-saving library that is actually, to me, the most important thing on my computer, on my hard drive. My reference library is pretty massive at this point, and I back it up on a regular basis and have extra backups even off-site, so to speak. I gave a copy to one of my friends just so that, although it might be slightly out of date, it is so important. I've invested so much time in organizing and the initial scanning in and organizing of my reference library that it would be devastating if anything happened to it.
Well, it's also a reference library of your own materials that you've created as well, which I thought was interesting. Because when I see reference, when I first think of reference, I'm thinking of outside reference sources. And as we were going through the chapter and I was reading it, I'm like, well, gosh, this makes so much sense, the way you draw symbols, the way that you do certain backgrounds, and what you do with those backgrounds. It would be important to have those as well for consistency, for, okay, when I'm looking back at this, I want to kind of tweak this because I've always wanted to tweak that and be able to look back at what I've done previously. I thought that was interesting to see that it wasn't just the outside reference work, but how much of it is also your own work, and why it would be important to have all of that referenced as well.
Yeah, to be easily called upon is the point of all of that stuff, is ease of use, and you only have so many hours of the day. You need to minimize and save time wherever you can, and that's a really good step to take. It's the equivalent of all those three-ring binders that I had of my reference collection. If it's too much, too hard to use, it's going to be unusable. So you've put all that time in it into creating something that's no longer functioning.
We get into Chapter 8, it's digital roughs. Now, what are roughs?
Okay, rough stands for rough layout. And rough layout is all about, once you read the script that you get from a writer, the comic book script, the initial ideas that you have on how the page will look, just the rough shapes of each figure. So if Superman's punching a guy, you still draw the gesture of him punching and the guy reacting to it, but you don't have to make the proportions perfect or the anatomy perfect. So roughs is basically just laying out the page. It's creating just a simple idea of what will become more elaborate later, so that you don't have to worry about all the later stuff. You're just worried about the fundamental storytelling of guiding someone's eye from one part of the page to the other. So, and actually, to me, roughs are the most mentally taxing part of drawing a comic book page. It is not the most time-consuming if you just looked at hours, but it's the most difficult because you're essentially taking the written word and your imagination and trying to apply that into some sort of shapes. You're trying to materialize a nebulous idea.